Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Shir. The Shir tonight, B'ezrat Hashem, is called the Chanukah, the Light Goes On. And what I want to talk tonight a little bit is not so much about Chanukah, which we've now passed, but the month of Tevet, and principally Asara B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet, a day of tragedy, a day of fasting. Chanukah is a unique festival in the Jewish calendar. Chanukah is the only festival that spans 2 months. All the other Jewish festivals are sit firmly and squarely and firmly in 1 month. Pesach is in Nisan. Let's start with Purim. Purim is in Adar, always in Adar. Nisan contains Pesach, and Sivan is Shavuos. We have Sukkot in Tishrei. Chanukah spans between 2 months, the month of Kislev, the month of Tevet. It's the only festival that does that. There's a mystical concept that's brought in the deepest Sfarim, that the months are divided up into the months of Yaakov and the months of Esau, the months of Jacob and the months of Esau. Esau is the nemesis of Yaakov. They are twin brothers, and as the Gemara says, when one is up, the other must be down. It's a symbiotic relationship. They can't both be up. When Kesaria is up, Yerushalayim is down, and vice versa. When spirituality is in the ascendant, physicality will be in the descendant. Right now, we're living in the world of Esau, a world of rampant materialism, selfishness, a world which is threatening to consume itself with its desire for hedonism and pleasure, a world where people don't really know who they are anymore. They can't define their genders, their identities. Selfishness has become so rampant that it threatens, like some green-eyed monster, to devour itself. The months, as I said, 6 months of Yaakov and 6 months of Esau. The month of Kislev, the month of the light of Chanukah, is the month of light, is the month of Yaakov, and Tevet is the month of darkness. But as we said, Chanukah spans the 2 months. When the Kodesh Baruch Hu created the world, there shone at the beginning of creation a light called the Or HaGanuz. This was a light which Hashem, HaGanuz means hidden. Hashem hid this light away. Chazal teaches this was a light which was so bright that you could see from one end of the world to the other. Now, this doesn't just mean that doesn't mean at all, probably, that it was very, very bright. What it means that when you can see from one side of the world to the other, it means that you could see cause and effect. We live in a world of darkness. We live in a world where we have questions. Why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? It's a world where we don't see cause and effect. We don't see why things happen. The Oregon was allowed you to see why things happen, and therefore it was very powerful. If you can figure out cause and effect, then that's something that, if you're a Rasha, Khalila, but an evil person could use that, for his own purposes, and cause tremendous damage, and therefore Kodesh Baruch Hu hid that light away. But that light, even though it's hidden, even though it's ganuz, it makes appearances throughout history. It makes its appearance in the lights of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash, it's learned out from a posuk. The Beis HaMikdash of Shlomo HaMelech, the windows were narrow on the inside and wide on the outside. Usually when you build a building, you build it the other way around. The narrow side is on the outside because you want to funnel the light as much as possible from the outside to the inside. If you can imagine in sound terms, a bit like a bullhorn. A bullhorn, the narrow end is the end where the sound emerges, and you want to amplify it, so you make it big at the end. So when you build a regular building, you build it to amplify the light, so the narrow end will be on the outside, and then the large aperture will be on the inside, so the maximum light will penetrate. Beis HaMikdash didn't need light. The Beis HaMikdash radiated light. It radiated the light of spirituality of the world, and therefore the windows were narrow on the inside and wide on the outside. The Or HaGanuz is visible in the menorah. the Or HaGanuz is also visible in the lights of Hanukkah. The number 36 is interesting in this context. We've said this before, if you count out the number of candles that you light on Hanukkah, excluding the shamash, on the first night you'll light 1 candle. On the second night you'll light 2 candles. 2 and 1 together is 3. If you light, on the third night you'll light 3 candles. So 3 plus 2 plus 1 will be 6. And if you continue this calculation, you'll end up with the number 36. 36 is a number which also is, as we said before, the number of the hours that the Kodesh Baruch Hu allowed the Or HaGanuz to shine at the beginning of creation before it was hidden away. And this is really what I wanted to get to, this idea that of Kislev, the month of light, the month of Yaakov, penetrating into the dark of Teves. If you count the number of days from the beginning of Hanukkah to the end of Tishrei, the end of Teves, you'll get to 36. There are 36 days between the beginning of Hanukkah and the end of Teves, meaning the light goes on. And I was thinking maybe this is why it always struck me as kind of a little unusual that the last day of Hanukkah, Zos Hanukkah, the day before yesterday, which is the apex of the celebration of Hanukkah, all 8 candles, Zos Hanukkah we read, this is Hanukkah. Really, if you think about it, once we've lit the candles, the previous evening, which of course, Vayi Erev Vayvoker, the Jewish day starts, most things start anyway, by night. But you wake up the following morning, and there's really no evidence of Hanukkah. The lights have been lit. True, there's a minhag to light them in the shul. True, there'll be Hallel. But these things are not what I would call connected to the Maisa mitzvah, the action of the mitzvah of the Chanukiah itself, the menorah. That's already gone, that's already done. And I was thinking maybe this is a perfect symbol, that the idea that the light goes on even into the part of that day where there is no visible sign of the mitzvah being done. And that's the idea of Hanukkah, which penetrates into the darkness of the month of Teves.
Why is it necessary that Kislev is light and Teves is dark?
Kislev is, well, we're going to see that Teves is a month of darkness because of what we're going to talk about now, Asara B'Teves. Asara B'Teves, the 10th of Teves, is a day of fasting. One of the 4 fasts that all Klal Yisrael is supposed to fast on. It's a rabbinic fast. It's a 12-hour, 13-hour fast. 3 things, actually. The 8th, the 9th, and the 10th of Teves were days of tragedy in the Jewish calendar. The first of those tragedies was the translation of the Torah into Greek. The story goes that Ptolemy, gathered together 2 different versions of the story, 72 sages, and he put them into 72 different rooms. And he went into each one of them and he said to each one of them, Tetargem li Torahs Moshe Rabcha, translate for me the Torah of Moshe, your rabbi, your teacher, into Greek. The Gemara in Megillah recounts how they all translated the Torah in such a way that was slightly different, but identically different, in order that Ptolemy would not be confused or make a mistake. For example, Ptolemy's wife's name was Arnevet. Arnevet is a rabbit or a hare, and it's a treif animal. So they translated in such a way that it would be acceptable to the king, that they didn't want to have it written down in the Septuagint that the Ptolemy, the king's wife, was Tomei. That's one example. There's another example that it says in the beginning, Bereshis bara Elokim. So they translate in the beginning of God's creation. Because they didn't want to translate it that he should think that Bereshis, bara Elokim, that there was some power called Bereshis that Chalila created God. Bereshis created Elokim. So they changed the translations in subtle ways in order that it would be acceptable, that Ptolemy shouldn't get annoyed or shouldn't make mistakes. But the miracle was that they all translated it identically. But this was a day of great tragedy, and Chazal compared the tragedy to the day of the breaking of the luchos, the breaking of the tables, the original 10 Commandments. The idea is that, I'm sorry, it was connected, they compared it to the day of the golden calf, the Egel Zahav. The idea of the tragedy is based on the fact that the Torah cannot be adequately translated into any other tongue. Lo targem kol tzorko. You can translate the surface of the text into another language. But when you do that, you lose all the tremendous secrets, the alliteration, the lack of one letter here, the dot in the Torah, a small letter here, the abundant depth of meaning that Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue, has. The Holy Tongue is called the Holy Tongue not just because it has no profanity in it, but because the Holy Tongue connects the source of something to its name. There's a famous Gemara that says that the Kodesh Baruch Hu took all the animals in front of Adam Rishon, the first man, and asked Adam to give them names. And Adam gave each of the animals their names, not in a conventional sense, but Adam was able to intuit the shorish, the root of their nefesh, their soul, so to speak, and express that in the name. And the very fascinating Medrash finishes off by saying that a Kodesh Baruch Hu says to Adam Rishon, "And what is my name?" And Adam Rishon says to Hashem, "Your name is Yud Kei Vav Kei." The name of something, Shem, Cham, v'Yafes, the three sons of Noach. Shem, name, means the expression of the essence to the outside world. All of this, which is contained in Lashon HaKodesh, is lost when you translate something into another language. You put it into a cage. Chazal say that there were 3 days of darkness that went out to the world when the Torah was translated into Greek, because the lion which had formerly been roaming free was locked into a cage. So to speak, it was possible for the Greeks to say, "Oh yeah, we have your Torah. It's a great book, wonderful book, full of wisdom. Yeah, you'll find it over there next to Plato and Socrates in the New Age stroke wisdom section." They put it into a cage. The Torah is the Devai Elokim. It's something holy. It's above the Seichel of man. It's the Seichel Eloki. It's the wisdom of God. It is above the ability of man to fully comprehend it. When you translate it into another language, you put it into a cage. It becomes limited. That was a day of darkness. The Torah became, so to speak, smaller. And we're going to see the 3 tragedies that are linked on these 3 days are all to do with haktana, diminution, making something smaller. Another part of this diminution was, as we say, the idea of Yovan is the idea of darkness. They darkened. It says, the Medrash says, about the 4 exiles which are hinted to right at the beginning of the Torah: the exile of Babylon, the exile of Paris, Persia and Media, the exile of Greece, and the exile of Rome. The Pasuk says, "Ha'aretz hayu so vavo, formless and empty." Formless is Babylon, empty is Persia. V'choshech al pnei sahom. Choshech stands for Greece, for the Greek culture. Because, says Chazal, shehechishu es einehem Yisrael b'gzeirasam, that they darkened the eyes of the Jewish people. The nature of Greek philosophy was to limit man's view of himself and existence within the hollow skull of a man. What I can see exists. What I can put under a microscope exists. What I cannot measure, by definition, does not exist. This is the darkness of Greece. This is the philosophy of Greece which made the world a smaller place, because it denied be'etzem, in essence. Not just that it's something we don't know about, but anything that we don't know, we cannot know. Man rules knowledge. Man rules what there is. If I can't measure it, it doesn't exist by definition. That's the Greek view. And that language which the Torah was translated into, a language self-evidently, represents the Weltanschauung, the worldview of a nation. The language of a nation has within it the worldview of that particular nation. Certain things are incommunicable in other languages. For example, I'll give you very sort of like the word in Hebrew, nachas. Nachas means pleasure. But specifically in Jewish terminology, nachas is related to the pleasure you have from seeing your children doing the right thing. As a Jewish goes, nachas is something you only get from your grandchildren. Okay, it's a joke, but the point is clear. I could give you another example. For example, in French, the word chic, C-H-I-C, chic. Impossible to translate into another language with one word. It's a combination of fashionable and, attractive and up-to-date, modish. There are many words like this. Schadenfreude. It's interesting, that's a word in German, which means the pleasure you have from seeing your enemy's downfall. That's a particularly German concept, I think. And it's interesting because the opposite concept exists in Yiddish. I'm not sure which way it goes round. We have to ask Rabbi Greenblatt. But in Yiddish there's a word to fargin. In Hebrew they made it into lefargen. I'm not sure which way it goes, but certainly the Yiddish to fargin means to be happy at somebody else's success. So that's the polar opposite of Schadenfreude, the German concept of rejoicing in someone's discomfiture, his downfall. Okay, I got off the subject here. The point is that when the Torah was translated into Greece, it was shut into a box. The world became a smaller place. And therefore, it was comparable with the day of the Egel Azav, the day where the first luchos were smashed, the first tablets of stone, the first Torah was smashed. That first Torah, the first luchos were the Maisa Elokim, and the Ktiva was Elokit. Both the material that it was written on was godly, and also the writing itself. The Luchas Hashnios, the second tablets, that was the tablets that Moshe Rabbeinu hewed. It was the action of man, Maisa Odom, and therefore it was not on the same level. In spite of the fact that, of course, the Ketiva, the writing was godly. But the Chomer, the substance, the material on which it was written was man-made. That's the 8th of Teves. 8th of Teves, again, we fast on the 10th of Teves, but it's really we're fasting for 3 days of tragedy. The 8th, the translation of the Torah into Greek. 9th of Teves. 9th of Teves was the death of Ezra. Ezra, according to some opinions, was Malachi, who was the last of the prophets. The death of Ezra marks the end of the great period of direct communication between God and man. Ad kan, until here the prophet spoke. Now we have to hat einecho, lend your ear, incline your ear, v'tishma, and hear the words of the Torah, of the sages. And with the death of Ezra, Malachi, comes the ascendance onto the world stage of Alexander of Macedon, who's called Alexander the Great, the essence of the Greek king. Now it's true that Alexander was somewhat sympathetic to the Jews, and there are Gemaras which describe how he, when coming to Yerushalayim, got off his horse and he bowed down to Shimon HaTzadik. Apparently because this was the figure. He saw a vision of Shimon HaTzadik in his dreams, and whenever he saw this apparition of Shimon HaTzadik in his dreams, he would be victorious in battle. But with the ascent of Greece and everything we spoke about, the Greek language, the Greek culture, the Greek philosophy, the world of prophecy cannot exist in an atmosphere, cannot breathe the air of Kfira. When the Greeks become the dominant power, when their philosophy, when their worldview becomes the dominant, that's a world that it's impossible for the idea of God speaking to man exists. And that also is the great era of the rise of Torah Sheba'al Peh, after the era of prophecy. But with the end of Ezra, Malachi dying, that was a day of tragedy, because again the world became a smaller place. There was no prophecy yet in the world anymore. Now there's another ninth tragedy that happened on the 9th of Tevet, and the quote that I wanted to say before is a brisa in the Seder Olam, which says, Ad kan, until here, hayu hanaviyim misnabim baruch hakodesh. Until this point, till Ezra died, until Alexander rose up to be the king of the world, until this point the prophets prophesied. From here, with Ruach HaKodesh, Mikan ve'elach, from now on, hat oznecha, incline your ear v'shma divrei chachamim. As we said, that's the rise of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Now, to go back to our second tragedy that happened on the 9th. In Megillus Tainus, it says the tragedy of the 9th day is not specified. The Chachamim did not reveal what the tragedy was. But apparently, there is an opinion that many commentaries, and amongst them commentaries which provide support with calculations, explain that the 9th of Teves was the day on which the founder of Christianity was born. Not the 25th of December, and even according to their calculations, it's very unlikely it was the 25th of December. According to this particular concept, this particular understanding of the secret tragedy of the 9th, that was the day of his birthday. And clearly, there's no man in the history of the world whose name has been invoked to such effect to spill Jewish blood. No man's name in the whole of the history of the world has been used to that extent. Jewish blood has flown without cease almost in his name. But apart from that, there's something else about his birth and the religion that he spawned brought a tremendous diminution to the world, a tremendous shrinking of the world. Before we go into that, though, I just want to mention what happened on the 10th of Tevet, which is the day we fast, which is the Siege of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim was placed b'matzor u'matzok, in siege and containment, crisis. Bavel is talking about the Babylonians. The Babylonians did something which was inconceivable. They besieged Yerushalayim. It's interesting because the Asara B'Teves doesn't happen now this year, but Asara B'Teves is the only day in the Jewish calendar that a fast can fall on Friday. No other fast, not Tisha B'Av, not Yom Kippur, ever falls on a Friday. And the reason is because when Asara B'Teves does fall on a Friday, as it does, one is faced with the very uncomfortable feeling of making Kiddush on a completely empty stomach. Now, it's not the covet of Shabbos to go into Shabbos hungry. You're not allowed to go into Shabbos on a full stomach because you have no appetite for a meal. Conversely, you're also not supposed to go into Shabbos in a state of starvation or hunger. And yet, Chazal understood that it was so significant that Asara B'Teves was the day that if it did fall out on a Friday, you would fast on that Friday. Why? Ostensibly, Asara B'Teves, of all the fasts, was the day where the least happened. Nothing happened. Not a shot was fired. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got killed. Why should Asara B'Teves be such a tragic day? If you look at an acorn, you're really looking at a tree. There's nothing in the tree that is not contained in the acorn. An acorn really is a tree which has not yet become a tree. It hasn't yet unraveled. It hasn't yet taken place. When the Babylonians put Yerushalayim b'matzor matzok, when they put it under siege, it wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of the end. At that point, from that point on, the fate of Yerushalayim was sealed. And the most tragic moment of any disaster, or one might say the seminal moment of any event, is when it becomes locked into inevitability. Even though it hasn't played out yet, even though you can't see the tragedy is already there. You just don't have the viewer. It's there right now. Where you had eyes to see, if you had the sensitivity to understand, you would see right there on the Sorah B'Teves, Tisha B'Av was already there. And for that reason, it's the most tragic of all the moments, and maybe it's even more tragic because nothing happened. Everything seemed to carry on, with the exception that Yerushalayim was now put under siege. Again, that's another element in Haktana, diminution. When Yerushalayim was put under siege, the Kimitzion Teitzei Torah, because the Torah goes out from Zion. The voice of the Torah was stifled, was trapped, was not allowed to go out. The world again became a smaller place. So let's pull it all together. As we said, a common theme unites these three tragedies. The idea of making things small. It's a small world after all, unfortunately. So the Gemara explains that, talking about tzitzis, the reason why tzitzis is included in our reading of Shema, for a variety of reasons, and one of those is, says the Gemara, to counteract, to contradict, la fukim en aha minim. Minim is a Hebrew word which means, and Rashi explains, what minus is. Quote, Rashi over there in Brachas Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, Otam, those people, ha'hofchim, who turn Ta'ameh HaTorah, the reasons of the Torah, lemedrash ta'ut ve'elil, to medrash, which means exegesis, ta'ut, mistaken, ve'elil. Now, elil is an interesting word. Elil. What does elil mean? Now, unbeknownst to the censor, Rashi was clever sneaking this one past. In Hebrew, one of the ways you can make a diminutive out of something is to double the final syllable. For example, a tree is etz. A sapling is atzitz. The tzadi is doubled. Eitz atzitz. I'll give you another example. Av is the hottest time of the year, high summer. What is the Hebrew word for spring, which is a small kind of summer? Aviv. Av, aviv. By doubling the second syllable, you make something smaller. You make it into the diminutive. If you take the name Kale, Alad and Lamed, which means God, and you double it, you come up with Elil. They took God, so to speak, and they made him smaller. They made him into a man. This is, in essence, what Christianity did, was to make the concept of Elokut, of godliness, into something which could reside, Chalila v'chas, l'haidaita, in the body of a man. El, Elil. Again, that is the tremendous smallness, if one can use such a contradiction in terms, the immense smallness of that religion. So again, we've got the 8th of Tevet, the translation of Torah into Greek. The world becomes a smaller place. A tragedy in line with, comparable with, the breaking of the Luchos and the destruction of the first luchas which contain with the Maisa Elokim, written on tablets hewn by God himself. The 9th of Tevet, as we said before, was the death of Ezra, the end of prophecy, the end of God speaking directly to man, and according to some calculations, the birthday of that man who was worshipped as an Elil. And on the 10th of Tevet, as we said, this was the day that Yerushalayim was put Matzor Matzok, Ki Mitzeh and Teitzer Torah. The Torah could no longer be broadcast as a result of the Babylonian surrounding the city. We're in the world, we'll finish with this, of Edom. As we discussed in previous weeks, there are 4 exiles, 4 great world historical exiles, and we're in the 4th of those. And towards the end of it, Baruch Hashem, the Ramban on Parshas Balak, which was actually censored in many editions, but it's available, explains how Edom is a branch of Yavan. It's called Tzim Miyad Kitim. That's what the Torah calls Edom. V'tzim Miyad Kitim, v'inu Ashur, v'inu Over, v'gam hu Adei Oved. Tzim Miyad Kitim. The Kitim are descendants of Yavan, of Greece. Edom, Rome, and of course when we talk about Rome, we talk about the cultural descendants of Rome, the Western world, sees itself as a continuation of Yavan. In point of fact, the Gemara speaks about Italia shel Yavan, Italy of Greece. It's an expression in the Gemara in many, many places. Edom has nothing of its own. The Medrash explains that it steals its culture and identity from others. And in point of fact, the prophet Avadia, who was actually a Ger, convert from Edom, described Edom as extremely small and extremely denigrated. Hine katon nosaticha bagoyam bozui atam oid. You're extremely lowly, says Hashem of Edom. And we're living in this world. All Edom's superficial enormity, his power, seemingly, his ability to span the world, all the technology, is nothing more than the fruits of his theft of other cultures. A culture that takes the loftiest and makes it into something small. Now, the month of Teves, the Sefer Yetzirah, which was ascribed to Avram Avinu, although the more accepted opinion is that these were Avram Avinu's ideas recorded by Rabbi Akiva, explains that each of the 12 tribes corresponds to the 12 months of the year. The month of Teves corresponds with the tribe of Don. Don was the Yerud Shebashvatim. Now, of course, all the tribes were holy, but Don was the lowest of the tribes. In point of fact, the Anane Kavod threatened to spit out from the clouds of glory, those divine agents of protection, these clouds, to expel Dan, because Avodah Zarah was so rife amongst them. A tribe chronically disturbed by Avodah Zarah, idol worship. It was a tribe that brought Avodah Zarah idols from Egypt and even to the sea where they split. And yet, despite Don's relative lowness, Don is joined to the highest of the Shvatim, to Judah, because, and if you remember, in the building of the Mishkan, Betzalel comes from the tribe of Yehuda, and Oholiav comes from the tribe of Don. You need both of them. You need the top and the bottom. The highest and the lowest always have to be connected. And when Moshe blessed the two tribes, he used the same two words, Gur Aryeh. They just both describe both tribes as lion, Gur Aryeh Yehuda and Dan Gur Aryeh. What was unique about Dan that, despite all its loneliness, makes it an integral part of the Jewish people and more connected to Yehuda, the highest of the tribes? The Torah explains in the middle of Yaakov's blessing to Dan, Yaakov suddenly stops in the middle and exclaims, Lishuoscha kivisi Hashem. I long for your salvation, Hashem. So, first class, it seems to be a non sequitur. What has this got to do with the bracha? If we look deeper, however, we'll realize that this exclamation is exactly what characterizes Dan. The Medrash says that Dan were a bitter people. Nevertheless, Dan embodies an enormous power, which is that he longs. Lishuoscha kivisi Hashem. Dan understands its loneliness. Dan understands where it's holding. And yet, what makes it so great is its desire to escape from this loneliness. And that's really, gentlemen, if I might suggest, where we are today. We are in the world of Dan. We are in a world where the only thing that connects us to Hashem is Lishuoscha kivisi Hashem, is the longing to be above the level that we're on. The Jewish people, as we live today, as we are today, embody this feeling. We all feel, I think, very low, very disconnected. When we look at our fathers, our forefathers, we look at the Avos, we look at the great rabbis of previous generations, we think we are so low. And yet, what connects us to that very high point, just like Dan Aryeh, Dan Gur Aryeh, Gur Aryeh Yehuda, what connects us is this burning desire. We may be at the bottom, we may be in the heel, in the Ikva de Mashiach, the lowest part of the Koma Shlema of the Jewish people, the very lowest, the end of time, the end of the body, the least sensitive part. And just like the heel, it's interesting, even though the heel is the least sensitive part of the body, it'll laugh at anything. That's our generation. We find everything funny. In spite of our very lowness, we have a tremendous power and a tremendous hope. It is that hope which is our power. If we really, really, really hope for salvation, Lishuoscha kivisi Hashem, then it's Hashem's haftocha, that however lowly we are, however far away we are, that Hashem will bring the Mashiach b'imheira v'yomeinu. Sure.
Why is it that, I mean, from my knowledge, from what I learned at least in public school, that Yoshko didn't inherently do anything bad. He was a Jew, and he was persecuted, I guess, by the Jews, and then something happened resulting in him being hung on the cross. So why is it that his name, one, is worshipped, and two, has caused and is still causing like a bad rep for the Jews? And because okay, he was Jewish, but I don't understand why he did that.
I mean, look, I'm not an expert on this, but the Gemara says that he was a mesis umadiach. He was a person who turned away people from keeping halacha, who turned away people away from Yiddishkeit, and he was chayiv misa for doing that. He was chayiv misa. And in those days, the secular arm, whoever it was, Pilate, the representative of Rome, had a relationship with the Sanhedrin, that they would execute people who were found who were chayiv misa by the Sanhedrin. So the process of his death was as a result of him going through due process. He was chayiv misa and he was executed
By the Jews?
by the Romans, but because the Romans were basically the secular authority, but he was handed over by the Beis Din to the Romans. But he was chayiv misa, he was paskin guilty. Why his name?
For leading others
Yes.
Which is interesting because the Romans carried out the death sentence.
Right.
All the Jews did was prosecute him.
True, but remember the Jews were, so to speak, under the control of Rome, meaning that the Jews were allowed to, at that point anyway, maintain their own judicial system, but the execution of power in whatever way it was, in, for example, like physical execution, or at that time crucifixion, was not something that the Beis Din was allowed to do. Why it is that he has caused so much blood has been spilled in his name, I'm not sure I can answer that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.